Kakuna has done a lot of work in Africa in terms of human rights. And sometimes we think that the tensions that occur are typically racial tensions. But for some of us who have grown in Africa, we know that there are tribal tensions. There are power tensions. They're basically economic tensions, and they're just as bad as racial tensions. That usually gets lost. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Dr. Rod.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes. Yeah. Phil, Kakuna, Angela. Hi, is everybody?
All good.
Good.
All
We're in
inside.
February already.
We're all still inside, George.
Yeah.
It's been I don't even know how long this is going to last.
Well, I'm getting ready to celebrate 1 year indoors in another few weeks. So hey.
Yes, it's been 1 year almost.
Yeah.
Kakuna, because you are joining us for the first time, just wanted to give you this time to let us know about yourself. Everybody, I know about yourself. I know about you.
I knew you would start. I knew you would start with me introing because you didn't want to do the heavy lifting, George. So
I know you're good at it.
So first I have to say, every time I see him, it's like a reunion, but it's also simultaneously a collision of different times in my life, but somehow very familial because it's like we share this outside of our natural environment experience. So, I'm always happy when I see George, but all that to say, I'll give you like the most edited version of this that I can. I'm the child of a Namibian freedom fighter and an exile, and a mother who was originally from LA. They met in New York, and when my dad came to America, to go to school to Lincoln University, let's just be very clear about that.
Yes.
Lincoln, the hotbed of political thought and Pan-Africanism, and it was there that he met Kwame Nkrumah and this one and that one and the other one, and which is one reason why we actually ended up in Ghana at one point when I was a child. So simultaneously, in fact, 2 months after I was born, there was the first big uprising in Namibia, in Windhoek, in the capital, because the South African government was forcibly relocating everyone to townships outside of the city, and also because they were really enforcing apartheid very stringently. And so 2 months after I was born, that was the situation. There was a lot of mobility between Namibia and Botswana as people who were deemed to be political in thought and acts started to have to flee for their lives. So my parents met here, married here. In fact, their first date was the Ghana Independence Day ceremonies at Town Hall, which is
really
kind of like, yeah. And I should back up because they actually met at the UN. My mother was the second by 2 weeks, and she'll never let anyone forget that, the second Black tour guide at the United Nations. She spoke 7 languages, 5 of which she was self-taught. And my dad was on a tour with his class from Lincoln University, and she was the tour guide. So that's how they met. Fast forward, it was very clear that, they wanted to be more involved on the local level. My mom was smart enough to have her 3 kids in 3 successive years and take off, with all of us with US passports that did absolutely nothing for us because we were Black people who were American citizens somewhere else, and so we didn't have the same privileges.
Wasn't Malcolm X? Wasn't your dad or somebody who introduced Malcolm X to somebody?
Yeah, well, actually, my dad was the first person to bring Malcolm X to the UN, and that was how he met a lot of the new young, his peers from Africa who were at, literally surrounding the UN, fighting for their independence and doing that work on the international diplomacy side of the equation, while the people back home were fighting. or fleeing, as the case may be. And so after my youngest brother was born, we actually moved back to we moved to Botswana, then Bechuanaland, and my parents were very much involved in organizing, community organizing of the Herero refugees from Namibia who had then fled into Botswana. And so that turned out to be a really bad idea for my father. And I always kind of, I always asked my mom, what were you thinking? Like, you were already on a list, and you went back into the dragon's mouth. And I realized, I had the luxury, of course, of being more pragmatic in my approaches. They were far more, I think, ideological in their thought and in their beliefs and in their pursuits, And so it ended up with my mom and three very young kids under house arrest in Botswana. My dad, outside, and had to flee as far as Ethiopia. And it was many years before we were reunified. I just have to kind of fast forward to, because and I do want to say that everywhere that we lived, and how we left Botswana, was two uncles who drove from Namibia and got us at night and continued to drive until I think we got to Zambia. In those days, there's no Pan-African highway or anything. It was sleeping in a Land Rover, and waking up and wherever you were, and a lot of risk. But my mom was just a remarkable person in that she was always down for the adventure. She wasn't one of those women who, bought into like the exceptional African husband situation and moving back to, a life of luxury. I mean, she was in it to win it for independence and to fight for, the average person. And I have to say, she came from a family that was very politically active, that was also very community focused. My grandfather's brother, Lauren Miller, was the publisher of the California Eagle, one of the first Black newspapers. He also was an attorney, and he is the person who argued against housing covenants in California, won the cases in the California Supreme Court, and then went to the Supreme Court in DC and argued against housing covenants. And as a result of his work, those restrictions on housing were abolished. And I think he would be just absolutely mortified to see where we are today. But that's another story. He also worked on Brown versus Board of Education. He and Thurgood Marshall had a shared practice for a number of years before Thurgood Marshall moved on. And he was always, and he also was part of that group of African American artists and intellectuals and and civil servants, as in civil servants to the community, not to a municipality, who were very interested in being part of, who were very global in their thought. And he was part of that group of African American artists who traveled to Russia, Langston Hughes and others, that group that traveled to Russia. They were always connected to, the struggle of peoples everywhere. And so, all that to say that I, grew up, with these people, as who both came to, create not just family, but impact on history, because of that shared commitment to everybody's struggle.
Exactly.
And in fact, when my mother was born in 1931 in Los Angeles, her father put down had them put under race Ethiopian. My mother's birth certificate says Ethiopian on it because he was all about the Ethiopian struggle, and he so,
known. I'm Ethiopian.
Yeah, so to this day, and of course, so fast forward, we moved back to the States and to New York. There was a lot going on at the UN around Namibia's independence that ended up becoming a protracted affair. my parents didn't want us to grow up here as teenagers. And so they sent us to boarding school in Ghana, which was very familiar to us. We had a huge extended family there. We had an aunt and uncle there who actually were originally from here, but my uncle, Dr. Bobby Lee, had met Kwame Nkrumah, and Nkrumah had invited him to Ghana because he and his wife, my aunt, Dr. Sarah Lee, were both dentists. They had been educated at Meharry, which is also an HBCU.
Wow.
And so they moved to Ghana in the 1950s with their two very young children. And and my Uncle Bobby was a staunch Pan-Africanist. He naturalized as a Ghanaian citizen. My Aunt Sarah was the pragmatist, and she kept that U.S. citizenship just in case. And my Aunt Sarah, when they were shipping all of their stuff over, she kitted out what do you call it? One of those trailers that you pull behind the car. She kitted it out as a dental clinic, and she brought community dentistry, to Ghana, and I think just to West Africa as a whole.
That was the first dentistry actually in Ghana, perhaps because there wasn't any dentistry going on, and if there was one, there was one for the British, which is interesting.
Exactly. And so it's like, but you see this whole, it's not as visible, and you're starting to learn more about it. But this relationship between Africans and African Americans that was ongoing, and that was multifaceted, and it was literally it was spread throughout the continent. It wasn't just as part of the Black Power movement and what have you, because, for example, my father was the first, Namibian to come to America, Black Namibian to come to America. That's ridiculous. People in Ghana and Nigeria had been going to Oxford for how many centuries. We were always very isolated because our history was very unique. We had what I call the trifecta. We had the settlers, we had the genocide.
But those settlers were from Germany.
Germany, exactly.
Or at least from South Africa, who had come.
Yes. Exactly. And so we had the German settlers, and then we had the genocide of my ethnic group, the Hereros and the Namas. And then, we had the apartheid after that. So we were a country that had been literally closed off from any society.
I think we're gonna get into the Herero. Wow, what's that? We're gonna get into the Herero soon. I was actually very interested in this, the U.S. side. Your mom being born in 1931, just around the same time that the Black History Month. It wasn't at the time a Black History Month. It was started as the Negro Week, kind of the Negro Week, and all of this time. So your life spans this Black History Month, the way it was created, and now we're here. I just wanted to find out from everybody. I mean, what is your story? That Kakuna story has been very, very interesting. Angela, what is your Black History Month story?
What's my Black History Month story? That's interesting. So, do you mean like in terms of
just anything you can doesn't have to be personal. It can be something you've just seen or you read about. What is important? What do you remember?
I think the most important thing for me was, going to school, and when we would have Black History Month, you would have like the same people that will always be talked about. So you will have Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, and one thing that my dad was really big about with my siblings, like he bought us like these whole set of books that talked about various different African American people. So we had inventors, people that were in the civil rights movement and stuff. So we just knew a vast amount about others that was not namely in the normal list of folks. So I thought that was really interesting. So I kind of cringe for the most part when Black History Month comes, because I know it's going to be that same list of people. I'm like, oh my God, there's so many other people in the list that contributed to the community. So that's a big thing for me.
You only get to know about the Black culture in February.
Yeah. Yes, and that's a huge thing for me. I cringe at that every year.
Yeah, I'm wondering how the Black uh, culture and history meshes with the Jewish history and culture. Phil, come on board.
Thanks for giving me an into this conversation, George. Okay. Yeah. Well, actually, that's a very interesting point, because yeah, there's been a lot of back and forth about Black Jewish relations over the years, and I think the standard narrative that held by many people, I mean, I can't speak for the Black community. Certainly in the Jewish community, there's this general idea that, we were all liberals, and the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with Dr. King, and a number of other rabbis and Jewish leaders went down there and lent their support. That's all true. I have to say, though, there is another side to the story, which is that, unfortunately, I don't have exact numbers, but there were certainly any number of Jews in this country who were, not that they were actively opposed to the civil rights movement, but they didn't really do very much. They weren't interested in supporting it, and even worse, that in their day-to-day activities, sometimes they, they practiced. They had some racist practices in business, in those who were landlords, in housing, that sort of thing. It's a very complicated story. I mean, I can remember growing up, first hearing the liberal narrative, and then later on kind of hearing this other side of it, because there were some incidents like the teachers' strike in New York City in the late 60s, which the Cliffs Notes version is that in those days, there was a central board of education that ran everything. Sort of similar to the current Department of Education, but much more like ironclad control. And there were a lot of objections that the board was basically, I mean, I think it was an all-white board, and that they were basically doing a disservice to neighborhoods of color in the city. So it was proposed to set up a series of community boards throughout the city, that the overall city would be broken down into different districts, and that each district would have its own board that would make policy. And after some of these boards were set up, some of them began getting rid of a certain number of white teachers, and the teachers' union, which was predominantly Jewish, began objecting to that. And the local boards came back with, well, you've been insensitive towards Black students, you don't help them, you write them off, too early, and so forth. And it was very ugly for a while. It was very ugly. There were ugly things said on both sides. And I think that what I took out of that was that there was, I'm not saying it was fair or unfair. I will say that, again, it's complicated, because it's been pointed out by some historians that Jews have sometimes, gotten, traditionally, Jews were given the jobs, and this goes back to Europe, that the predominant Gentile society wouldn't do, whether it was tax collector or, just the people who kind of enforce the policies of the state in a way that the average person could get especially ticked off and blame them, rather than blaming the people who sent them to collect the taxes or whatever. And, some Jewish leaders felt the same thing was going on here, that it's like, okay, that people in Black neighborhoods would come to resent their Jewish landlords or their Jewish merchants or whatever, who would operate in those neighborhoods, even though they were simply the face of institutional racism rather than the people who were actually making the policies. So I can say that, but at the same time, we can say that that still doesn't let some individual Jews off the hook who might have charged ridiculous rents or treated their customers or something like that. So this is a long way of saying that it's been a complex history. I mean, I try to say that for myself, I've always been supportive. I've always tried to kind of, whatever I can, with whatever money I have, my votes, my, being in marches, try to be supportive. I think that, I'm not going to sit back and say Jews have had a perfect record here. I'll never forget, I'll finish with the story here. I saw James Baldwin about a year before he died. He was speaking at the 63rd Street Y here in New York. And, I would say it was if not predominantly, there were a lot of Jewish people in the audience. And I think someone asked him about what he thought about, Jewish behavior towards Black people in America. And he said, well, I'm trying to sort of paraphrasing here. He's saying that there have been many exceptions, but I think on the whole, the Jew in America has behaved like the white man in America. And, you know, I thought at the time that was maybe a bit harsh, but I think it's looking back on it now, I like to think that what he meant was, again, um, if you look at the overall history, you can't say that the Jewish people, you know, as a whole, have been the shining exception to what has been going on, because I think too many people simply kind of went along with whatever the predominant ethos or practices were at the time. But as he said, there were prominent exceptions, and you know, I cherish those exceptions. But I would never hold out and say, like, you know, don't blame us. We're different. We've been exceptions, you know, from the beginning, all of us, because it's simply not true.
Well, you don't have to explain yourself that much, Phil. I know you, and it's interesting you bringing in James Baldwin, one of my best, favorite authors. Of course, the Black-Jewish connection has always been, before that, been based on religion. And I think that's a very interesting part to delve into, the fact that Black folks relate their own suffering to, you know, the suffering of the Jews in Egypt. However, correct it is, I don't know. That's not mine to evaluate. But I think that there is this issue of when you go through a very bad experience and you get over that experience, how do you deal with your freedom and your power? And I just don't understand how that becomes a big issue for a lot of people. Kakuna, you when Phil was talking about what was going on in New York, I know that you guys had already decamped and gone to Ghana. So complete the story about, you know, your education in Ghana and how that comes back to because you dealt with a lot of Jewish people as well. You dealt with a lot of Africans. You dealt with a lot of African Americans. You have done a lot, and I just wanted you to bring back your story into this one.
Well, even though we the kids decamped for, you know, those high school years, and, you know, we're back and forth to New York. I mean, my parents were very much here in New York. I mean, we always, from when we first moved back from Africa, lived on Eastern Parkway, you know, right across the street from the Brooklyn Museum. And you know, I grew up with an extended family that included many, many Jewish families who were very politically active and who were, you know, who took risks. I mean, you know, to their themselves and their families to to hold those views publicly. And you know, one of the families who lived in our building, the father, you know, published the Communist Workers Party's newspaper. And so it ran the gamut, but we always we grew up in an environment where we were very aware that the people who were part of our lives were different from the rest of their people, because we didn't see or experience that support from even the rest of the people. And they were outliers in their own families. Let's
Right.
just be clear.
But even in South Africa, didn't you have a lot of Black Jewish connection against?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And for example, one of the people who funded my dad's being able to go to school in South Africa for secondary school was the grandfather Pupkewitz, who's like it's a huge company in Namibia. My grandmother worked for their family, and he paid for my father's tuition. My father would never have gone to secondary school, and, you know, decent secondary school in Namibia in his generation. And ultimately, that was a school that was connected. It was a Methodist, and I think connected to the AMEs here in the United States. So there were a lot of African Americans who came over, and to teach, and that's how he ended up going to Lincoln. But all that to say, I think, just as we have political people in the African American community, there are political people in the Jewish community, and then there are those who just don't have, either don't want to be a part of it, or in the side of any, person of Caucasian descent in America, choose to benefit from that privilege, and being associated with, these types of, with any type of political, activities, and espouse certain, political views, is by virtue of that, is exiling them from that, greater community that enjoys privilege, which, even though they will never be accepted by, let's say, the old blue bloods, the WASP and whatever. And yes, there were periods of time where, Blacks and Jews were standing side by side as people who were not allowed into certain environments, but ultimately it was just Blacks who were not allowed into the certain environments. So, I think that I have to say it's a little bit more complicated than, some people, stood up for, and others just, didn't get involved, because, I think of, the never again, philosophy that's constantly, espoused, and has been a part of my education, my, not just religious education, when it comes to my exposure to the Jewish community, but, you have to look at situations like Darfur, and you have to look at situations like Rwanda, and say, how can you possibly still be saying never again when these these incredibly horrific, experiences have transpired? I mean, it's like time, for me, I feel like it's time to retire never again. What you're saying basically is, never again is this going to happen to us.
I think at this point, I probably should say that Kakuna has done a lot of work in Africa in terms of human rights. And sometimes we think that the tensions that occur are typically racial tensions. But for some of us who have grown in Africa, we know that there are tribal tensions. There are power tensions. They're basically economic tensions, and they're just as bad as racial tensions. That usually gets lost. Yeah. And when you are working in Africa trying to get rid of something that I should tell people here, Kakuna was one of those, along with others like Ann Nelson, working for the CPJ. When I was in locked up, and a friend of mine was also locked up. These are the people who, as a journalist, because journalists are never liked anywhere. These are the people who, Kakuna was one of those, were working.
Never.
And I've always been working for the release of journalists around the world who are being muzzled and being jailed by their governments.
Yeah. Well, I was telling Angela earlier, it's like, it always feels like a reunion, but it's such a strange reunion whenever I see George, because we never met in person. It was all like advocacy, by phone, by fax, by this, by that, by, through trying to influence policy and what have you, to help get George and others in his situation released from prison, or even help them to go into exile, because their lives were threatened. And it wasn't until a few years ago at my daughter's college graduation that I saw this family of Africans, and I looked at them and I was like, one guy, he's wearing like a Ghana shirt, but he's not Ghanaian. He looks like an East African, and it was the father of this other family. And so finally, as everything is winding down at the reception later, I was like, I told my family, hold my bag for a minute. I have to go and greet these Africans. I need to know who they are. And I go over, and the family, beautiful family, everybody's so happy. We're all so happy. I'm congratulating them. And as we go down the list, and George is the last one, and I'm introducing myself to him, and he says, no, we know each other already. And it was just one of those moments that you live for, because, when you do the old days of human rights work, not human rights before it became an industry.
Yes.
The old human rights work, and even even within a human rights organization, I was an outlier because I focused far more on the actual individuals who were impacted than I did on policy. I mean, I made my rounds. I testified in Congress, in the Senate, and I spoke to ambassadors endlessly. But my focus was really on the well-being and security of those individuals who were affected. So it was just, it's I mean, imagine it's like 20 years later, and here I am meeting George Orwell, and it's like, are you kidding me? So yeah, so that was a wonderful, that was that was the payback for all of the sleepless nights,
For
right?
all of that.
And that was the payback right there, and for it to be such a joyous occasion, was also just perfect. So yeah, I mean, I do, I do have to say though, that it's fascinating because you're talking about African Black history and Black History Month, and for me, my mom was one of the first, well, early adopters of Kwanzaa when we were here in this country, because she felt that she, whenever possible, she was an educator. Let me just put that out on the table. And also dealing with those issues that Phil was mentioning during the late 60s at the Board of Ed. Very, very, those are some old memories. But she, was the early adopter of Kwanzaa. She turned it into like a whole like African ceremony. People came from other states, and to this day, they still talk about, like my mother's Kwanzaa's. I mean, the food, the music, the moments where, we acknowledged all the young children's accomplishments, and they each got a little gift. Asking for the blessings of the ancestors. I mean, she really turned it into an African ceremony but for African Americans, and a way of reconnecting. And so when I think of Black History Month, I just had a really, kind of strange interaction with a very good friend who I sent her a video that was on TikTok that was kind of funny. This woman celebrating Black History Month by changing into lots of different African outfits. And it was just kind of hilarious. And she replied to me, and she's also like me. Her father is Nigerian, her mother was African American. And she said, oh, I'm so done with these these Black History Month videos. And my friend, Esther in Ghana, had to tell some African Americans there that you don't, it's unnecessary to celebrate Black History Month in Ghana. And I just was like, whoa, that is so bizarre.
Wait a minute.
And I was like, wait a minute now. So, this is someone I love dearly. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I have to come hard now. I have to come hard at you. And so I just told her, I said, listen, I don't see anything wrong with African Americans celebrating Black History Month, and even if they live in Africa, because they're celebrating people who we want to recognize, who were African Americans, and their contributions. And quite frankly, maybe Esther could learn a little something or two about Mary McLeod Bethune, and and others, Sojourner Truth and others who don't fall into that paradigm that Angela was mentioning of Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and
the same individuals that Angela was talking about.
Yeah, well, the ones that basically, white America chose to be elevated, right? And
exalted. Yeah. As a matter of fact, Black History Month is being celebrated in Canada, in Holland, in the UK, in
spread.
Where? France.
Well, but I think the whole premise that now you're in Africa, you don't have to, you should be focused on being an African. And it's like, hey, just, when you as Africans, when we as Africans come to America, we don't even want to be bothered with knowing anything about African American history. We're here to make the money, get our kids into good schools, and then, build our house back home in East Legon or Lekki Phase 2 in Lagos or whatever, and then retire back home, right? And so, this is a history of indifference on one side and resentment on the other,
That's right.
and you can switch it both ways. But it's legitimate, So my position was, I think that I think you should be, encouraging Esther to maybe, find a way to collaborate, on this Black History Month situation, so that maybe kids in Ghana can be educated about Black people who did something, as opposed to the gangsters that they see in the movies and the music videos, who they're emulating, And so
Yeah.
that was really fascinating to me. I just thought, whoa.
I wanted to move
Can I-
the conversation. Oh, go ahead. And then I move the conversation
Just a
to
quick observation.
vaccination.
Yeah, sorry, George. Yeah, just a quick observation about that. I mean, a couple of years ago, one of my kids said to me, like, I don't understand this idea of like Black History Month. Why is there this 1 month that's so special and all that? And I said, well, that's because the other 11 months out of the year, we don't talk about that. And I think that, it's important also that it's not simply the month, because having two kids who are in public schools, it's really been impressive to see the way, at least in my experience, the curriculum has adapted to this over the years. I mean, recently one of my kids came back, and I was asking him, like, what's in your lesson? What are you learning about? He said, oh, doing a paper on the Ashanti civilization. And when I was in school, nobody talked about the Ashanti. Nobody talked about any kind of African civilization. Nobody talked about the idea that there were thriving civilizations in Africa for years before, the Europeans came.
For first contact, exactly, pre-contact. Right. Well, I think we all agree that Black History Black History Month actually starts on January 1st and it ends on December 31st. But Black History Month as a construct is literally a political tool that that Black Americans forced into existence, so that for this 28-day period of time, institutions cannot prevent that form of expression, or those forms of educating others to take place. So it legitimized, even if it's just for that month, how it's a way that we're still chipping away at systemic racism, right? I mean, and it's better to have Black History Month than not to have.
It's the shortest month in the year.
I don't care. I don't care what month.
I'll take it.
That's it. I'm here for it.
Right.
And I want everybody to be pumping out programming all day long in February. That's it.
And I think we should use the Black History Month as well. Did I? Oh, why am I having this? To talk about what is going on right now. What are the problems you're having with COVID? And now that, because from data, one of the problems you're having is that data has been a problem within the Black community and those who are dealing with the Black community. And regarding vaccination that is going on, nobody knows how many have been affected, but exactly. But there's a belief there's a lot of people have been affected. A lot of Black people have been affected, and then we're having this situation of vaccination, which had a terrible rollout in last year and the beginning of this year. And now they're trying to rectify just about everything. If you look at the available data, which is still very much incomplete, we have about 26 million cases nationwide, 450,000 dead, but you cannot find out how many of those are minorities. You've had about 56 million vaccine doses that were distributed. About 34 million of them have been administered. Some of them are missing. You can't actually find how many of those doses have gone to minorities. Vaccination in this country is a total mess. Israel Incidentally, Israel is doing much, much better. It would be interesting to find out in Israel itself whether the Palestinians have also gotten vaccinated
Not
at
yet.
that high rate. But there's a strong anti-vax movement in this country. And particularly it's affecting the Black community. It's affecting the Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community particularly, I think so. And I wanted to find out what you guys think about it. Angela, let's start off with you.
I would say in terms of vaccinations, there's a lot of just distrust with the Black community in America with regards to the healthcare system, period, because we can talk about a lot of experiments that was done and granted by the government on the Black community, and there's just not a belief that first of all, there's not enough data to support the fact that the vaccinations are going to do what they're supposed to do. So let's talk about that first and foremost. But then going back in history within the Black community and things that has happened throughout the years. First on the Black community, if we talk about the Tuskegee Airmen and other genocides that has happened to the Black women in terms of pregnancies and different things like that, there's just no trust, period. So a lot of Black people are not really flagging out to go get the vaccine for them and their families. So that's the first thing that is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, of friends and folks that I've talked to when it comes to the vaccines.
And which is interesting because I'm thinking when they're dead, the population shrinks, people suffer, and your political power goes down because there are not many votes. Sorry about that, but
one way to look at it, however, it's just so much, so much other stuff that is compiled onto this, because we can talk about the systematic racism, because even though there has been vaccines designated for the Black and brown communities, I've read a couple of articles that just have come out that you have had affluent white people are going to those communities and taking those places. So even though
that's going on in New York,
even though that they are saying that these are specifically for the Black and brown communities, you still have the folks that think that I am qualified and I need to get these vaccinations because I'm affluent, because I have money, because I'm white, all this other stuff. So that's another a challenge that's affecting the Black community. They're not getting to the people that they're supposed to be getting to.
But I think part of the underlying issue is the same issues. They're the same issues that have put our community at a disadvantage. From time immemorial. For example, to even register, we have this huge digital divide. So to even register if you wanted the vaccine, if you don't have computer access, and if you don't have a computer, if you don't have internet access, you're already at a disadvantage. But I think also, and this is also what happened with remote learning, for public school students. It was like, oh, we're going to give the students iPads. Well, are you going to give them internet access? Because otherwise they still can't get into their class. They can look at a blank iPad screen. It took a while for the city, to get that together. And still many, many families do not have regular internet access. So their kids aren't getting a holistic education, as limited as even that might be during the era of coronavirus. I think that what really stands out for me, because somebody who also ran the Soros Foundation for West Africa and was dealing with communities that were facing similar challenges, I had to be a very prescriptive donor. I couldn't just say, oh, okay, I'm going to finance this project you want to do, and I think you have the right people to do it. I always had a program officer do a forensic, kind of audit of their capacity, and I always was, providing 2 years of internet, making sure they had a fax, making sure they had a working computer, and so that they could at least do the admin that was related
That
to
you're
the
looking for,
actual
yes.
program activity. So we have very strong community-based organizations in our communities, okay? What the cities should be doing is having them, work to do the frontline work of outreach and education. They are trusted in their communities. They are known in their communities. If you created that network in all of the main, all of these communities in New York City, that you would see a sea change, with regard to the number of people who'd be able to go and get a vaccine. You could even have, for example, Meals on Wheels goes to all the old people. You could even work with an organization like Meals on Wheels where they have a separate, little unit, some kind of iPad-ish kind of unit where they could be registering old people for the vaccine as they are delivering their meals to them. There's so many possibilities.
There's a lot to do. I don't know why New York is lagging behind, because quite frankly, I have not gotten it, and I don't expect to get vaccinated until perhaps in the summer.
Part of it, George, is because our mayor is an incompetent moron, and
exactly. I've always been saying this. I'm very, very disappointed by De Blasio.
You mean you're sick of living in the Tale of Two Cities still?
Seriously.
We started with him in the Tale of Two Cities. We're still stuck in this Dickensian Tale of Two Cities, and he's leaving in a matter of months,
Exactly. Yeah. And Phil, go ahead.
I was going to say that, yeah, I know a lot of us are just counting the days towards next January when he leaves office. And yeah, he's been a disappointment. And of course, the fact that there's this constant bickering between him and Cuomo.
Yes.
And Cuomo has also had some, blots on his record. Overall, it's been a better record than de Blasio, but he still has some things like the nursing homes to answer for. No, I think I was going to say, though, not to change the subject, but, from what you mentioned before, George, about the Jewish community, I don't hold it against any Black person in this country who's reluctant to get the vaccine for all the reasons that we've discussed. I do hold it against this particular, and not to get into the weeds here, but the ultra-Orthodox is kind of like one name. People can still be ultra-Orthodox and kind of have a tie to the modern world. We're talking about the people known as Hasidim here and Haredim in Israel, or as some of us Jews call them, the black hats, because that's what they're commonly seen with. And they have been a major impediment. I really do not have much empathy for their refusal to comply with the simplest regulations that the government has asked them to follow. I know some of them will say, well, it's our religious practices, you're being anti-religion. The Bible.
They follow Trump. They follow Trump. I think so.
They follow Trump. Well, yeah, some of them follow Trump, right? They have that in common with white Gentiles who refuse to get vaccinated. But I don't hear much talk about a conspiracy theory as you would hear among Christian Trump supporters. I think it's more the sense that we have our practices and we can't violate them for any reason. If we're going to pack people into our synagogues for funerals or other ceremonies, that's who we are. That's what we do. Well, the fact is that I'm not an expert on the Bible. I don't have the exact passage, but I do know that in the Bible, it says very clearly in the Old Testament that, if your life is at stake, if you have to disobey or not follow certain rules and commandments in order to survive, you are permitted to do that. This has been very clear. They could have done that and they refuse not to. I think that there's just an underlying distrust and suspicion of technology, government, modernity, what have you, that has caused this to happen. And it's been very, very destructive. And I just, I'm
wondering, how is Israel then succeeding, at least in vaccination? Is the data right, or they're using a different system? Because they do have Orthodox, and especially the immigrants from Russia and other Middle Eastern countries.
Well, those, particularly the Russian immigrants, tend to be a lot more secular. They are really not Orthodox at all. I mean, it's a very odd situation in Israel in that Orthodox Judaism is kind of the official state religion. But it's not really. I mean, your Reform and Conservative Judaism is officially not recognized, but it's like a lot of people simply don't. I mean, they consider themselves Jews, but only in a cultural sense. They don't really, follow any of the practices at all. So we're talking about a significant but a minority nonetheless of the Haredim, as they're called, who refused to get vaccinated. And so the majority of Israelis did get vaccinated. As you touched on before, George, there has been some controversy about, allowing Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to get the vaccine. And obviously, we currently have a government in Israel that is very anti-Palestinian, but my understanding is there have been efforts by non-governmental organizations in the UN and so forth to get the vaccine to the Palestinians. Part of it is the fact is that the governments in the West Bank and Gaza are not that well run, and that's also a factor. But that, to answer your question, I mean, I think the reason why it's been so successful is that the vast majority of Israelis are not, going to be consider themselves bound by these religious restrictions, and they signed up in droves and they got vaccinated, and there you are.
I think we need to come back to school. We need to come back to school, and that requires some kind of work on vaccination. Somebody was going to talk. Was that Kakuna?
I mean, because I had heard on the radio a few days ago, it's not like 80% of the population in Israel has been vaccinated. I think it's only about 20% of the population has been vaccinated. But the way that the story is being told, you'd think that like 75, 80, 90% of the country has been vaccinated, and that's not the case. However, they've done an excellent job at getting 20% of the country vaccinated in a very short period of time. I don't know what the best practices are that we can learn, but I think also, it's like what, day 11 or something, or day 14. We're talking about a situation where the woman who's the head of health is, when she got to her office and asked the question, she was told nobody knew how many vaccines there were. I mean, so considering what we're up against, nobody knows where some of the vaccines are. No, I think what's happening right now is, the infrastructure is literally being built in real time.
Yes.
And that's why it's like the military, this one, that one, the other. The infrastructure is being built in real time, and simultaneously, we had no relationship between the states and the federal government. The federal government has, through all the COVID relief, has not deemed states and cities worthy of receiving relief. So you've seen a hodgepodge lodge, because it's not as if all the governors did the same thing and all the mayors did the same thing. Everybody made the best decision they could make with the political pressures that they were under and the populations that they're serving, and whether or not they have an election coming up.
Exactly.
So we've kind of been in a very it's like a funhouse mirrors kind of experience. Thankfully, Joe Biden, with all his wisdom, is smashing the mirrors, and now the cleanup is taking place, and hopefully, we'll be able, I think that we can have a conversation about, where COVID vaccine implementation is maybe a couple of months from now, based on reality. But I mean, until then, we're just still, we're still paying the price for Trump, and that Trump tax, man, we're going to be paying it for a long time.
For a long time. Trump may be gone, but the Republicans are still there. And talking about tax, try looking for a house right now, because you can't find it. Partly because of this COVID, and partly because the taxes are so high in certain parts of the country, particularly around New York, in California. I don't know how it is in Chicago's south side. But Angela, how is the COVID situation? I mean, the situation with regards to vaccination, the kids really need to go back to school.
Yes, the kids really need to go back to school because they're causing a lot of chaos here. There's been a lot of uptakes with them stealing cars and going to do just random things around the city. So the kids are bored. They need to be back in school seriously. But as far as the vaccinations, there's a push specifically to get the teachers vaccinated first. But the Chicago public school system, the teachers went on strike because they were not too happy about what was happening in terms of like pushing them to go back to school. Because prior to all of this, they shut down a lot of the schools.
Oh.
So the students are going to be overpopulated in one class while they're still trying to keep social distancing. So it's a lot of stuff that they're dealing with. But I just recently heard that they came to an agreement. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the kids will be back in school because some of these kids need to be shaken really, really badly.
In your, like, you did all of them in your program, right? In your
Yeah.
yeah.
I worked mostly with the teenagers, and I understand a lot of the teachers are going through the challenges because some of my friends, they have elderly parents that they're taking care of, so they're concerned about having to be around their parents, but also concerned with the being in class with not the enough resources and not enough space. The ventilation systems in some of these schools are very, very old, so it's going to cause other issues to come about. But the administrators are trying to adhere to the politics within the city, also trying to adhere to the parents and the parent teacher organizations and stuff like that. So it's a lot. I would not want to be a teacher right now. I would not want to be a parent right now. So I think I'm in a good place.
Yes. Let me just get a few things before we end this show. I just wanted us to figure out, for example, Phil, what you expect to happen with the $1.9 trillion package that the government or that the administration is trying to come up with. You have a huge kind of resistance from Republicans. I don't know how this is going to work because there's so many other policy issues that need to be tackled that they won't have any support from Republicans for, and that they need to use the reconciliation for. And so it's a very tricky situation for them now.
Well, I mean, the bottom line apparently is that this is going to be passed, that if they can't get enough or any Republican support, they're going to pass it through the budget reconciliation process, which is, it's kind of, I mean, it's a necessary evil, I would say. There was an interesting article in the Times today from Ezra Klein about how, this is a symbol of how the Senate is so broken and paralyzed because of the ridiculous filibuster and all these other things. And so if anything gets done, the majority party just says, all right, budget reconciliation, which was not the reason that the practice was introduced in the first place. But that's a long story, and I refer you to his article. So I think it will go through one way or another. I think that, the one thing that people sensibly objected to, I think, was the whole idea of, I think, $1,400 checks to everyone making $75K a year or less. And Biden has indicated that, okay, it probably should be more a needs-based, a needs basis rather than just a blanket 14K to everyone. And I think that's a good idea. But I think, part of the problem is, my understanding is that what a number of the Republicans, perhaps including that group of 10 moderates who went to see Biden last week and were pushing for this thing that was like 1/3 of the total of his package. One of their objections is that the package includes aid to states and cities. And I remember some of the, disgusting things that were said last year when you had people like Governor Cuomo saying, we're in danger of going bankrupt if we don't get this aid. And you had Republican politicians like Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, who is like one of the, well, don't get me started on him, but he said something like, these, and a number of them said things like, I was governor of Florida, we balanced our budget. These Democrat states, they don't balance their budget, they're poorly run. And Trump said the same thing. Why help bail out these Democrat, I say Democrat, not Democratic, Democrat-run states, because they're all mismanaged. And to me, this is another code word for they spend too much money on these programs for people who are too lazy to work and blah, 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 that kind of thing. We don't have that problem out in Wyoming. Why does New York have this problem?
Yeah,
we know what this is.
It's a racial code,
Yeah.
which
Without
right now, I think we for me, I think this is the best time to have Bernie Sanders as the chair of the budget committee, because he knows what needs to be in that legislation.
Yes, Bernie. Definitely. Yes, Grandpa.
Yes, Bernie.
Yeah, so I think Bernie's gonna do us some good there, because he's very, very concerned about what happened 10 years ago when the Susan Collins and Olympia Snow just strung up the Obama administration until they couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think Biden, I get the impression that Biden and his people have learned from what happened, in the last crisis under Obama, and they're not going to repeat the same mistake. They're not going to sit back and wait for a couple of reasonable Republicans to come to the table. I mean, I think Biden did the right thing to listen to them and then say, sorry, we're not pushing for 1/3 of what we want. No, we want the whole package, and that's it.
Yeah. No doubt.
But Kakuna, what do you think about Andrew Yang? Because my son sent me an email saying, "Are you voting for Andrew Yang?"
I mean, it's like Andrew Yang and everybody. I mean, there's like how many? 20 some odd, 30 people running right now. I mean, it's such a distraction. First of all,
Yeah.
I don't think Andrew Yang gets like the New York thing, the New York experience. I just feel like, yeah, he's a great person to maybe hire to run something,
Yeah.
but I think New York you need a born and bred, diehard New Yorker to run this city who has lived in New York City over a continuum of eras, and who has like some historical context, who knows what it is to wake up in the morning and get your coffee from a Yemeni and your newspaper from a Pakistani, and the token booth clerk is Jamaican.
I think he's born in New York, except that he's
not a New Yorker. I mean,
you could be born there, but you're not a New Yorker. New York is its own country.
Yeah.
I know that.
But I mean, I think for mayor of New York, I couldn't, with other roles, community, city council or community, whatever, that I don't have a problem with people, but being like new to New York. But I think New York is it's a tough city. I mean, look at us. I mean, we're policed by people who live on Staten Island and out in Suffolk
and Suffolk County in Long Island.
And I mean, who literally despise us. We just we have so much history and so many things that need to change. De Blasio, he sold himself as that person.
He wanted his wife. Actually, he used his family.
Yeah, the wife, his son's afro. The whole thing. I mean, and in the end, the cops turned their backs on him at the front end, and ever since then he's been their monkey, and he just won't he won't stand up for anything. And also I think something that happens to people when you are up against strong forces that are challenging you, and it's oftentimes for the wrong reason. You start to move inward. You start becoming more and more insular, and you want people around you who are going to tell you what you want to hear, and you don't want to even hear that much from them. And I think that's kind of been the de Blasio scenario, and it's unfortunate because over the course of his tenure, there have been so many opportunities, just lots of missed opportunities. Lots of ideas. And, sometimes when he comes on Brian Lehrer on Thursday mornings for Meet the Ask the Mayor, I just turn it off. I just don't want to even hear it.
Yeah. I mean, I had a lot I had very high hopes for him, and I don't think he's really worked very well.
I think,
And,
the problem was that he wanted to be this great like progressive icon, and he wasn't interested in the nuts and bolts of actual governing, which is why personally I think, while I'm not following the race that closely either, I do like Scott Stringer, who's currently the city controller and was the Manhattan Borough president, because this is a guy who really knows the nuts and bolts and yet is very progressive in his ideas. I think he'd be the best combination, but I'm not sold yet. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I don't think anybody who comes to the race with with de Blasio on their resume is going to do very well.
That's why I don't think Maya is gonna go.
No. I mean, if you got de Blasio and MSNBC, that's all you have.
That's all you have.
We don't want to.
That's not gonna fly. That's not gonna fly.
Yeah, there's a lot of money coming in. Actually, a lot of Wall Street money is being poured into somebody that just plucked from Citibank.
Yeah, McGuire, I think his name.
Ray McGuire.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, thank you.
I don't know anybody from Citibank. I really don't think very highly of them.
He did an interview also on Brian Lehrer about a month or so ago. The guy wouldn't answer a question, and
it doesn't know anything.
Would you put your kid in public school? He refused. It's like
that's saying a lot.
No, you don't even value. No,
there are these black guys whom they pick from somewhere and they give money and they think that they can use this because they're black to get votes, right? Yep. Basically, that's what they're trying to do.
Well, also Ray McGuire has a lot of money himself, so he's a career Wall Street guy. He's got access to money. He's the kind of black person who speaks the language, right? And they see him as a company guy. Like if he got into office, he wouldn't rock the boat, and the situation that New York is in requires like a perfect, for you to navigate a perfect storm. He doesn't have the skills to navigate a perfect storm.
Yeah.
Okay. And nor does he have the inclination.
All right. Okay, that's very good. It's been a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope everybody enjoyed it. You and everybody there watching us. This is a conversation that typically touches on culture and how it affects day-to-day lives of everybody. And I think we're going to pick up from there 2 weeks from today. Please like us, share, and subscribe to our podcast. Hopefully, we shall come with another great episode in about 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
See you later.